CNBC-TV18.
You represent the leadership of global finance and economy at a time when the world is facing serious economic difficulty.
At the G20, the message from the G7 has been very clear that the Russia-Ukraine war has to be condemned in the strongest words, and there can be no dilution of the Bali text, especially when it comes to the wording on the war. And any dilution will not be acceptable to the G7. I spoke about this to Jeremy Hunt, the UK Chancellor. He also spoke about the IT survey on the BBC. Listen in. Let me begin by asking you about your key message to the Indian government at this G20, especially when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia war, because we believe that at the meeting there is a pressure to dilute the text, especially on Ukraine.
Well, we are very clear that it would be a big mistake to make the text any weaker than it was at the leaders' meeting agreed in Bali, and I think it's widely understood that on the anniversary of the terrible invasion of Ukraine, that would send exactly the wrong signal. I want to congratulate the government of India. I think they've done a fantastic job putting together this summit. It's obviously a very difficult international situation, and to have a G20 meeting in which you have the United States, the United Kingdom, Russia around the same table is very challenging. But I think the Indian Finance Minister Sitharaman has done an excellent job in making the summit happen in the way it should.
What roadmap do you see the G20 coming up with, or need to come up with, in order to avoid a global recession? And can UK itself avoid a recession? How are you working towards avoiding one?
Well, we have a budget in a couple of weeks' time. We'll be doing everything we can to bring down inflation and get us back on a path of growth. That's our plan. And what I think is widely understood here at the G20 is that if we want a healthy global economy, we cannot go back to a world in which small countries worry that they might just be invaded by bigger countries. And that's why we need to take a united front against the evil aggression by Russia in Ukraine and stand foursquare behind the Ukrainian people.
Right. My final questions. The BBC is facing a tax survey in India. Have you taken this up with your counterpart here in India?
Well, I don't want to get into the private discussions that I had, but what I would say is, that I'm very confident this matter will be resolved quickly, and I think the importance of democracy, open societies, that is in India's DNA as much as it's in any country's DNA. So India has an independent judiciary. It's not for me to say what should happen, because I know how important that independence is.
Central bank governors whom we spoke to at the G20 were very clear that the biggest threat to the global economy right now is the Ukraine-Russia war, and all attempts must be made to stop it. I caught up with South Korea's central bank governor here at the G20 meeting in Bengaluru. Listen in to what he told us.
Expedition of the debt restructuring schemes, such as the common framework, to help the developing countries. The second issue is the international regulation collaboration regarding the digital technology, especially crypto and fintech. And the third one is the 16th General Review Quota, which means that the IMF quota reform. I think those three things, if we can, the G20 can have some consensus, and moving forward, that would be great news for the global economy.
How hopeful are you of a consensus, and why is some sort of consensus on the war necessary?
Look, this is a very difficult political question, and most of the discussion about Russia-Ukraine war was led by the United States and Western countries with Russia. So I really do not have inside information, but I can say that this is one of the most important agenda globally, whether it's a G20 or not. So if the G20 or whatever political format, if we can end the war sooner, I think this will be a great achievement for the whole global economy. This is the most important issue in the world at this moment.
My final question, your outlook for the world economy this year, key risks that G20 must consider and deliberate on?
Look, unlike the pandemic situation and last year, I think the individual country circumstances is now become quite different. Last year, most major countries high inflation, and controlling the inflation is very important. Still, the inflation is very high. I think each individual country can have a different policy compared with the last 2 years. But on the other hand, I think because it can affect international capital mobility, anything, so clear communication of the major central bank, major countries' fiscal policy, clear communication and collaboration among themselves is very important to avoid sudden moves.
Sustaining growth will be a challenge for Europe in the current geopolitical environment, but a recession is not a threat at this point. That's the word coming in from Italy's central bank governor. He also told CNBC-TV18 about the dangers he sees in the cryptocurrency sector. Watch this exclusive.
Most of us have a priority, that of somehow dealing with global challenges through our cooperation, improved cooperation. There are a number of challenges. They are in the financial realm, and therefore we are discussing about reducing financial instability risks in the non-bank financial intermediation sector, with the cryptos and so on. We are discussing about climate change, which is very important. It is clearly a global challenge, and we have to act fast. Then there are the return to a better world. We have suffered a lot in the last 3-4 years. We had this major problem of the pandemics. I think at the end we were successful, but perhaps overly successful. We have inflation not only as a consequence because of our actions, but also because of what happened in Ukraine and with the invasion of Russia. And that is something that we are dealing with. And one thing that it has to be seen is that monetary policy by central banks is going in the same direction. The thing that we have discussing here is whether these will be successful. We'll see it in the next few months, but certainly what we have been observing is a situation better than the one we expected last year.
The ECB has raised interest rates by 3 percentage points recently. There's also talk about a 50 basis point hike for March as well. Are you very concerned about future rate hikes?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that it is 300 basis points starting from where? Starting from a negative interest rate. So in terms of real interest rates, say 1 year from now, the real interest rates are around zero. So there is nothing to be concerned, frankly. What we have to do is to be careful in not overdoing, but certainly we are doing fine, and these 50 basis points was predicated on the fact that while energy prices have been going down substantially, certainly the gas prices, which are the most relevant for us, this has not yet been seen in non-energy prices, the prices of goods which are produced domestically. And so this means that we have to be cautious and determined. We will have, however, to decide on the basis of the information that is becoming available. We say meeting by meeting, even if we already indicated that we may increase by 50 basis points again in March. It is really meeting by meeting.
Is a recession inevitable for Europe?
No. It's not inevitable. There is, as a matter of fact, we have been surprised that there has been a much better performance than expected during the summer of last year, the third quarter. We were considering the possibility of a technical recession, if you want, between the fourth quarter of last year and the first of this year. Nothing like this is really there. We have a substantial slowdown, and this is because there is a terms of trade effect. We lost terms of trade because of the increase in energy prices, and this has a negative negative effect on the economy, on the demand and also on supply.
Keeping up growth, sustaining growth will be a challenge, according to you.
Certainly, sustaining growth is very important, especially for a country like mine, where there is an aging population, where there is a transformation of the economy towards more innovative sectors, and there is an important European, in part European-financed plan for recovery, which we have to deliver. With public infrastructures really going in the right direction, both in the digital world and in the transition from brown to green. But at the same time, we need a lot of investment of the private sector, and therefore the infrastructure, immaterial infrastructures, have to improve.
Will inflation remain in the ECB's target of 2%?
Well, it has to go back to 2%. For the time being, inflation is above that, and all what we are doing is somehow reacting to what has been a supply shock, trying not to have it developing second-round effects, that is, even if minor, some wage price spiral. Now that we are seeing that energy prices have gone down again, we hope they will not rise another time, but if they remain at these levels, well, prices of goods and services have to follow.
Right.
And with interest rates, we will somehow steer the economy in order for that to be the case.
My final question on cryptocurrencies. There's a discussion going on here. Italy is setting up an ecosystem. What's your view on cryptocurrencies?
Well, there are many kinds of cryptocurrencies and so on. Certainly, my view is that those cryptocurrencies which do not have a clear issuer, or which not have value per se, are more similar to gambling instruments rather than to asset securities, the one that normally we regulate and supervise. So we have to make very clear that they are dangerous, if you want, on the AML side. There may be problems also on stability if people do not realize the risks that that are embedded in them. And so this kind of cryptos, as well as the use of technologies, distributed ledger technologies, in ways which are not transparent, is a problem. We are doing a lot of work to try to regulate the whole system. Certainly this is not a substitute for legal currency, the legal tender. It is something that goes with the digital world. And so in this sense, we have to regulate it carefully.
On that note, we take a short break, but don't go anywhere. When we return, we will get you an exclusive conversation with the French Finance Minister, Bruno Le Maire. At the G20 meet here in Bali, we also caught up exclusively with the French Finance Minister, Bruno Le Maire. He told CNBC-TV18 that any dilution of the G20 Bali text on Ukraine will not be acceptable to the G7. He also spoke about the need to implement the common framework on debt resolution to help countries like Zambia and Sri Lanka, and the need to reform and strengthen multilateral development banks. Listen in. Let me begin by asking you about your focus during this G20 presidency and the priorities that India should have during this 1 year.
First of all, I would like to insist on the perfect organization of this G20. India has done really a great job to organize a very constructive G20 meeting. I think that first of all we have to face the consequences of the war in Ukraine. We were talking about the final communiqué. We want the final communiqué to stick to the wording of the G20 in Bali, not to step back on the condemnation of the illegal aggression of Ukraine. Second, I think that one of the key challenge is the risk of having a fragmentation of the globalization due to the difficulties of the developing countries. So we should all gather, thanks to the leadership of India, to provide more effective financial and technical support to developing countries that have been facing the consequences of COVID, of inflation, of the war in Ukraine, and of course of climate change.
Right. How would you like the Ukraine-Russia war and Russia's invasion of Ukraine to be condemned in the communique. And which are these countries which want the Bali text to be watered down?
Well, we cannot water down a communique that has been decided by the head of states. And we cannot water down a communique which makes very clear that we all condemn the illegal and brutal aggression of Ukraine. I would like to quote Prime Minister Modi when he says it is not an era of war. He's fully right, and we should stick to the wise sentence of Prime Minister Modi. This is not an era of war, and it would be a mistake not to have a ceasefire, not to put that war to an end.
Right. I would also like to ask you about some of the main economic priorities that you would like the G20 to address, especially around the common framework on debt resolution and changes in the international financial architecture. Let's first talk about the common framework because debt in many emerging economies is a major cause for concern, especially when we're looking at the global financial situation.
You're right. I really think that debt is maybe one of the most significant concerns for many developing countries. So we have to address the issue, and we have the right tool, because when you are looking at the common framework, it proved to be very efficient in the restructuring of the debt of Chad. So we should get use of the same instrument to deal with the difficulties in Ghana, in Sri Lanka, for example. And I've been discussing the point with the Indian finance minister, with the Indian presidency, which fully shares this assessment that this is time to implement the common framework. It is not time to change the common framework.
Right. What is the responsibility of countries like China when it comes to debt and transparency on the amount of debt that is there?
China is a key country and one of the major superpowers in the world, which means that China has a key responsibility too. And we really count on China to play the game of the common framework. China has been very helpful in dealing with the situation in Chad, and we would like really to have China on board, having exactly the same attitude for the countries that are also facing this burden of very high debt and which are asking for a very quick and fair restructuring of their debt.
Right. On the international financial architecture, what are the changes that you're seeking this time in the G20 meeting?
I think that one of the key points is the role of the multilateral development banks, which have a key role to play in the fight against climate change and in the financial solution that we need to provide to developing countries to face the consequences of climate change and to prevent climate change. So this is one of the points that should be addressed under the G20 presidency of India.
On the bilateral front, you had a meeting, a constructive meeting with Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Could you give us a sense of how the French-India economic ties are set to evolve, your meetings that have taken place apart from the ministerial and duties here at the G20?
I'm just smiling because I would say that we have a perfect bilateral relationship with India. And we have been having this relationship for many years, for many decades. India is a key country. India has a key role to play between the eastern countries and the western countries. I think that on the bilateral front, we have many deliverables which are quite positive. I'm thinking, of course, of the Airbus aircraft that has been bought by Air India. We have many other prospects. We are talking together on the key question of nuclear energy. And you know, when you are talking about nuclear energy with a country, since this is a very sensitive technology, it is the very clear evidence that you have a very profound and a friendly relationship. I think that it's time now to expand this economic relationship to new fields. Renewable energies, hydrogen, green cities, transportation. On all those topics, I think that there is room for improving and accelerating the relationship between our two countries.
My final question, Minister, what are the risks that you see to the global economy this year, which France is preparing for, the risks to the French economy and the European economy?
The war in Ukraine. Let's be very clear, there cannot be sustainable and stable economic development with the risk of an extension of the war in Ukraine. So that's why we want to condemn on the strongest manner the illegal aggression of Russia. And everybody should be aware that the conflict in Ukraine is not a regional conflict. It is affecting the global economy. It is a global conflict.
That's all the time we had for you on this special edition of Global Eye from Bengaluru, where the G20 meeting is taking place. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.